A lot of you asked, and now it's time for Uncle Lou to deliver the final 2019 college football official Uncle Lou Top 10. Let's go! Hey, good morning, and that is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou! Live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. Man, I sure do appreciate it also. And in addition to all of that as well, this is the final Uncle Lou Top 10 poll of the season. A lot of you have been asking me over the last week or so if I was going to do one of these. Got some time today, so we're going to go ahead and get it knocked out. And to answer all the questions that are going to come about preseason 2020 polls, I do a series of preseason polls every single offseason. This year will be no different. The first one will be out after signing day, the first week in February. I'll put out my initial, way too early, top 10 2020 poll. I'll then do another one after the spring game, and then I'll do a final preseason poll towards the end of the summer, usually around the middle to the end of July when I'm starting my team preview and prediction videos. So that's the top 10 schedule leading all the way up to the start of the 2020 season. There you go. But let's get started with this one right now. All right, you guys, make sure you subscribe. Stick around during the offseason. College football only lasts 4 or 5 months. Well, the games only last about 4 months. There is no college football season or offseason. College football is a year-round business these days, and I post college football videos every single day of the year. So don't run off just because the last game has been played. There's plenty of college football to talk in the offseason. In fact, some of the best videos I've made, some of the most popular videos I've made have come during the offseason. We have a lot of free time, a lot of time for me to talk about things that I don't have time to talk about during the season. We have actual games to talk about. So stick around. We have a lot of fun here on this channel in the offseason. We cover the signing days. We cover the spring trainings. We cover all the summer arrests that are bound to happen at UGA and sometimes other places too. But mostly UGA. It seems like every year we can't stay out of trouble up there in Athens. But anyway, I hope you guys will stick around year-round, not run off just because the games are over. I look forward to hanging out with you guys all off season long. All right, here comes the top 10. I think there's only 2 teams in my top 10 that lost a bowl game. I think the rest of these teams won. I did take a look at the coaches and the AP poll briefly before I made this poll, but mainly I'm going off my final regular season poll that I did after the conference championship games. Listen, there's not really a lot of argument and debate, I don't think, about which 10 teams should be in the top 10. There are maybe a few spots within the top 10 that can be argued. And if you look just outside of the top 10, I'll just give you an example. The AP and the coaches have the exact same 10 teams in their top 10. A couple of the spots are mixed around, but they have the same teams in the top 10. I believe I do too. Maybe a little bit of a different order, though. The 5 teams that are on the cusp of being in the top 10, and these are still really good teams for 2019, just didn't quite make my top 10 or the AP or the coaches. So if you have a problem with any of these teams I'm about to name not being in the top 10, you can take it up with the AP voters and the coaches of all the schools who vote in the poll, too, because they didn't make the top 10 in those either. In no particular order, though, Notre Dame, Baylor, Auburn, Iowa, Wisconsin. Those, to me, are bubble top 10 teams that didn't quite make it. So maybe you put them in some sort of order between 11 and 15. Wisconsin had a really good year. Notre Dame had a pretty good year, but lost 2 big games, which really hurt them. Baylor, of course, runner-up in the Big 12, loser of the Sugar Bowl. That kept them out of the top 10. Auburn lost their bowl game after beating Alabama in the Iron Bowl. That probably kept them out of the top 10. That lost to Minnesota. And Iowa had a pretty good season too. They seem like they finish around the 15 mark almost every single year, like 15 to 20. They're probably at the lower end of the top 15, but they probably would be in most people's top 15, but they didn't quite make the top 10. Now, I do my top 10, 10 to 1. We're going to start now. Coming up first at number 10, probably the biggest surprise team to finish in the top 10. And like I mentioned, they also finished in the top 10 in the coaches in the AP. The spot may have been off, a ranking or two. I think they were 10 in the other polls too. The Minnesota Golden Gophers. What PJ Fleck and the row your boats are doing up there in Minnesota this year was amazing. If you didn't watch Minnesota play any this year, I feel like you missed out. They were a fun and exciting team to watch. I feel like the Big Ten sort of has a reputation of still being like a slow league or something like that. And maybe it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. I really feel like the Big Ten has evolved. You look at what Ohio State is doing offensively. Even a team like Penn State puts up pretty good numbers. Wisconsin is really sort of the best team in the Big Ten that still sort of runs that ground and pound offense. But you do have some innovative, creative, and fun to watch offenses in the Big Ten this year. And Minnesota was a fun team to watch all the way around. Of course, they finished their season off with a big win over Auburn in the bowl game, which propelled them into the top 10. Lost a couple of tough games this year, but every game they lost was to a good team. I think the worst team they lost to was probably Iowa, and we just talked about them being most likely a top 15 team. And that was a tough spot for Minnesota. If you remember that Iowa game they had, no one really was buying into Minnesota, right? They hosted Penn State at home sort of late in the season. Minnesota was undefeated, but no one was really buying it. And they beat Penn State at home. It was one of the biggest wins for Minnesota, probably since the 40s or 50s. I mean, I have to go back a really long ways to find a win that big for Minnesota. The following week, they had to turn around and go on the road to Iowa, and they lost a tough, low-scoring game on the road. But all of their losses came to pretty good teams, and I think they deserve a top 10 ranking. I honestly believe probably the most surprising team that finished in the top 10. Now, there were some people maybe that knew Minnesota would have a good team or thought they might have a good team or thought they might have a chance to win their division. I really don't think anybody saw Minnesota legitimately finishing as a top 10 team, but they found a way to do it. So shout out to PJ Fleck and what he's got going on up there at Minnesota. We'll see if he can continue keep it rolling. But final top 10 poll for 2019, I've got Minnesota at number 10. That brings us down to number 9. I've got Alabama. I'll be honest, Alabama is in the top 10 in every single poll. I think they deserve to be in the top 10 finishing the season in every single poll. This was one I sort of struggled with. If someone wants to tell me they should be 8, I'm okay with that. It was hard for me to decide between number 8 and number 9. I came down with Bama at number 9. Hard for me to get over their loss, particularly to Auburn. I know they had injuries, but listen, you play Auburn the last game in November. Literally every team in America has players hurt and injured that time of year. It's hard for me really to give a team a pass for losing a game in November, even if they have a key player out or injured. And of course, Tua did not play in that game after suffering the injury a couple of weeks prior. He did play against LSU. That was their other loss. Alabama sort of had this narrative during the season that they, hadn't beat a ranked team, going all the way back to the national championship game with Clemson last January. They had lost 3 in a row heading into the bowl game. They lost to Clemson. The next ranked team they played was LSU, lost to them. Next ranked team they played was Auburn, lost to them. And they finally got that streak ended and the monkey off their back during bowl season with a win over Michigan. It's not that I don't put any stock at all into that win over Michigan. There's just a couple of things I think that you just have to take into account when you're trying to decide how meaningful was that win in terms of where you rank Alabama in the final poll. Number one, almost everybody within the top 10 or 15 beats Jim Harbaugh in Michigan every single time they play. No matter what you want to look at. You want to look at bowl games. They got blown out by Florida last year. You want to look at big conference games. We all know Harbaugh never won the division. Can't beat Ohio State, winless against them. So it's sort of a pattern with Michigan and Jim Harbaugh and losing these big games. Now, that doesn't mean Alabama didn't play well. That doesn't mean it wasn't a good win for Alabama. It clearly was. But in terms of trying to rank them higher in the final top 10 poll, I think the fact that they beat Michigan and sort of the reputation that people have of Michigan and sort of expecting them to lose in these situations is one of the reasons I came down with Alabama at 9 as opposed to 8. But like I said, I've got no problem with anybody putting Alabama as high as 8 in their final top 10 poll. Any higher than that, I think is ridiculous, but I think you could put them 8. I've got them 9. Number 8, I have Penn State, and this was the team I went back and forth with on Bama. Should it be Bama? Should it be Penn State? Who should be 9? Who should be 8? I ended up going with Penn State there. They beat Memphis in their bowl game, and I'm going to be completely honest with you right now. I think Memphis is better than Michigan. I just believe that. If I was going to continue to rank my teams on down past the 11th spot, I would have Memphis ahead of Michigan. So Penn State beating Memphis, to me, is a better win than Alabama beating Michigan. I know it's a bowl game. I know it's hard to look at these bowl games and figure out exactly how much they mean in terms of trying to figure out how good these teams are. But I just came down with Penn State at number 8. And Penn State, to me, is probably the second most surprising team within the top 10. I thought this was going to be sort of a transitional year for Penn State. Not a bad year. They recruit too well, really, to have a bad year, and James Franklin's too good of a coach. But I thought they would lose another game or two than they actually ended up losing. I thought 2020 would be the year where Penn State would maybe be a top 10 team, compete to win the Big Ten, maybe challenge Ohio State for that crown in the Big Ten. They were a year early, in my opinion, and I think Penn State's going to be a very dangerous team next year. It wouldn't surprise me to see some people picking Penn State to win the Big Ten next year. I know Ohio State's got a lot coming back too, and they're the perennial favorite up there, but I think Penn State's going to be a really, really good team next year to keep an eye on in the Big Ten, and they finished the year this year in my top 10 at number 8. Number 7, our second SEC team, Florida. Second year in a row, Dan Mullen finishes in the top 10. Second year in a row, he finishes second in the SEC East. Second year in a row, he gets a big bowl win in a New Year's 6 this year, beating Virginia, following up last year's beatdown, like we mentioned before, of Michigan in a New Year's 6 bowl. Florida's going to have a lot of hype heading into next season, too. They return a lot of pieces. Dan Mullen, an offensive guy. The defense always seems to be okay down there. They do lose some receivers. They haven't recruited. I wouldn't put Florida in the elite recruitment category right now. If you look at their last 3 or 4 classes, which is what a team consists of, I wouldn't put Florida in the elite category. They're still recruiting as about the 3rd, 4th, or 5th best team in the SEC if you just go on recruiting rankings. Clearly, I know there's a lot more that goes into winning games than recruiting rankings, but that's where it starts, is with your recruiting. And right now, they're trailing your Alabamas, your Georgias, your LSUs, and really even your Texas A&Ms if you look over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. But they're going to have a lot of hype heading into next season. Trask will be back at quarterback. They've got some pieces there on offense. You got to assume Florida's offensive line will be better next year than it was this year. This year, that was a big concern for Florida. Defense, they lose some pieces, but it seems like they lose pieces every single year. And it seems like it never really matters all that much. Florida's defense has been pretty good even after losing Will Muschamp. And I think a lot of people, myself included, they looked at the Will Muschamp years and even the year or two after that where Florida won the East with Jim McElwain, and they said, well, they're only winning the East with an elite defense because Will Muschamp's players, as soon as they cycle through, Florida's defense will take a step back. And that really hasn't happened yet. They played LSU pretty close for the most part. Of course, they beat Auburn this year, played Georgia closer than they've played them in the last couple of years, losing by 7 points was that game, 24-17. That one ended up being something like that. So they're getting closer. Can they take that next step next year and actually beat Georgia, win the SEC East, compete for an SEC title? We'll see. I know I joke about it a lot here, but eventually a good coach has to win a division, right? You can't clown Jim Harbaugh for having top 15 teams every year, but not being able to win his division. And then you yourself have a coach who has top 10 teams now 2 years in a row, but has been a head coach in the SEC and has 0 division titles. At some point, you have to jump that hurdle and take the next step. Georgia can't win the SEC East every year in a row. I'm a Georgia fan. That would make me happy if that were the case, but I've been watching football a long, long time. Winning a division in the SEC 3 years in a row is a minor miracle. Doing it 4 times in a row is next to impossible. It's only been done once, and that was by Florida back in the mid-90s. Steve Spurrier won the East 4 times in a row and ended up winning the national championship that 4th year. What does that mean? Well, clearly it means Georgia's going to win the East this year. It's 4th year in a row and win the national championship. But short of that, though, the point is eventually there's going to be a year where Georgia doesn't win the East. And right now, when you look at the East and the way it sets up, Florida, in my mind, is clearly the team that is standing there waiting on Georgia to stumble. And if that happens, I think Florida will be there to pick up the pieces and win the East. Would that be this year? I don't know. But he had another good year in 2019. I've got him number 7 in my final final poll for 2019. Number 6, I struggle with this one too. Oklahoma. I'm going to be honest. I'm a little bit biased against Oklahoma. I'm a little bit sick and tired of Oklahoma. I just honestly am. They make the playoffs every single year with the same team, the same formula, and the result is the same every single year. And I'm a little bit tired of seeing it. Do I think Oklahoma did not deserve a playoff spot? Yeah, I think they deserved it. When you look at who else was around them, who were you going to give it to? I mean, in the end, they did win the Big 12 with just the one loss. It's hard to keep them out. Who were you going to put in ahead of them? A 2-loss Oregon? Probably not. A 2-loss Georgia that lost its conference championship game? Probably not. So you get the idea there. Do I think Oregon or do I think Oklahoma was the fourth best team? No. And that's the argument with the playoff every single year. Are they really trying to put the 4 best teams in, or are they putting the 4 teams in that they think deserve to be there, or is it a combination of those two things? I think it's probably a combination of those two things. So I don't have a problem with Oklahoma getting in this year because honestly, I feel like they probably deserved it, even though I don't feel like they were one of the best 4 teams. With that being said, I've seen enough now. Unless Oklahoma runs the table in 2020 and finishes 13-0 with a Big 12 title and has a defense that is significantly better than anything we have seen from Oklahoma over the last 3 or 4 years, I do not want to see them anywhere near a college football playoff. As a college football fan, I'm just getting tired of seeing it. I know that's not fair. I know Oklahoma fans are going to disagree. I know you're going to say, well, if they win the division with one or the conference with one loss and there's not a bunch of other undefeated conference champions, what do you expect them to do? I get all that. It's just as a college football fan, I'm tired of seeing this every single year. 3-4 years in a row now, same thing for Oklahoma. Plug and play quarterback system, score 45 points a game, run up and down the field like it's a track meet on offense, can't tackle or do basic things on defense, win the Big 12 with one loss, show up in the college football playoff, and the team that you're playing basically considers that game a bye. You just can't get it done in the playoff, and we all know it's because of your defense. Now, you fired Stoops a couple of years ago, the DC, you brought in Grinch. For a while this year, your defense looked like it was a little bit better, but down the second half of the season, down the stretch when it mattered most, you just couldn't do anything at all defensively. And then the playoff game against LSU was just an absolute embarrassment. It looked like a college team versus a high school team. The LSU ended up scoring 63. They could have scored 100. They scored 8 touchdowns in the first half against you. I know LSU had a dynamic offense this year, one of the best we've seen, but breaking news, Oklahoma has that offense every single year. So quit telling me that, LSU scored 63, but they had the best offense in college football. You've had the best offense in college football for 3 of the last 4 years and can't do squaddly douche in the playoffs. So, in the end, LSU had a better defense than you, as well as a better offense, and that's another reason why they blew you out. But I'm not the only one that feels this way. People are just getting tired of seeing this same formula with Oklahoma. Yes, you have an amazing offense. More than that, you have an amazing system on offense that you've developed under Lincoln Riley over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. Even though he's only been head coach there for 3 years, he was the OC there under Stoops for years before that. It's a plug-and-play system at this point at Oklahoma. Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. 3 years, 3 different quarterbacks, 3 Big 12 titles with 1 loss or less, and 3 no-shows in the college football playoffs. People are just getting tired of seeing it, but I do have you number 6 in the final 2019 poll. Congratulations for that, I guess. I don't know. Number 5, Oregon. They won the Rose Bowl. I would like to have seen... Honestly, what I wanted to happen when Georgia, had I known Georgia was going to lose the SEC title game, which is, of course, what ended up happening, my preference would have been that Utah beat Oregon in the Pac-12 title game and Utah gotten a chance in the college football playoff. Now, they went out and crapped the bed in a bowl game against Texas, who is still back to not being in the top 10 in the final poll and back to losing 5 games a season. But I would have enjoyed watching Utah lose to LSU more than I enjoyed watching Oklahoma lose to LSU. That's the point. But that didn't happen. Utah lost. Oregon, I think, 5th best team. I really believe that. And I think you can make an argument that they're the 4th best team. Clearly, I have Georgia 4th. Yeah, I'm a Georgia fan. Type about it. I'm just an idiot homer. I looked it up. Georgia is 4th in the AP and the coaches. So Clearly, I'm not putting UJ fourth because I'm just a homer. If you want to put Oregon fourth and put Georgia fifth, I'm okay with that. I think that would have been a good game this year, Georgia versus Oregon. The reason I put Georgia fourth instead of Oregon, both UJ and Oregon both won New Year's Six bowls, right? Had pretty similar seasons with pretty similar records. I ended up putting Georgia fourth because they have a common opponent, Auburn. Georgia beat Auburn on the road at Auburn. Oregon lost to Auburn in a neutral site game. Now, Oregon outplayed Auburn in that game, and I think Auburn was extremely lucky to win that game, but results matter, and you lost that game. Georgia played Auburn and beat them. That's why I have Georgia for Georgia. Talk about them for a minute. I better not see the same offense from Georgia next year that I've been seeing the last couple of years. It clearly doesn't work. Georgia is probably, over the last 3 years, Georgia has probably had the best roster in college football from top to bottom. That is an opinion, and that is one that can be debated. If you look at recruiting rankings, Georgia has the third or fourth most talented team in America. Eventually, something's got to happen with Georgia on offense. I think that something has happened. What is it? It's Jake Fromm leaving. Not going to turn this into a Jake Fromm video, but he's gone. We're going to have a new quarterback next year. We brought in a new offensive coordinator, Monken, which surprised me. Not that we brought in an offensive guy. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me is that we brought in an offensive guy and actually gave him the title offensive coordinator, demoting James Coley. That surprised me. I did not think Kirby would swallow that pill and admit that maybe Coley's, wasn't what he needed. But credit to Kirby Smart, he did it. I think the light has come on in Kirby's head. Do we have the pieces to run the type of offense that we need to win it all next year? I don't know, but I'm just happy that all signs are pointing to the fact that Georgia is at least looking to make that change offensively, because the type of offense that Georgia has right now will not win a national title in today's college football. Kirby Smart has seen that, so I'm excited for Georgia and what that means for their offense going forward. Number 3, I have Ohio State. Ohio State versus Clemson was an amazing game in the first round of the college football playoff, and really, if they were to play 10 times, don't you think each team would win 5 times? I do. I'm not taking anything away from Clemson in that game. I don't buy into the referees cost Ohio State the game argument that some people like to make. Were there bad calls in that game? Yes. Breaking news. There were bad calls in the 63-28 Oklahoma versus LSU game too. There were bad calls in the LSU versus LSU versus Clemson national title game. There are bad calls in every single game. Here's the deal. When it's that big of a game on that big of a stage and the game ends up being decided by 1 score or less, there's always going to be a call or 2 or 5 that you can point to that the referees made that you can say, well, if they wouldn't have made that call, if they wouldn't have made this call, or if they would have made that call or would have made that call, the outcome would have been different. You can always point to that and say that in any game that ends in 1 score or less. The reality is Ohio State lost that game because they scored 4 times in the first 20 minutes, but only 1 touchdown. You dominated Clemson the first 20 minutes of that first half, yet you were only up 16-0. You scored 4 times, 3 field goals and a touchdown. Unacceptable. Self-inflicted penalties, running into the punter when you would have got the ball back at midfield. Instead, you're giving Clemson extra possessions where they go down and score. So I don't buy into the referees thing. The reality is that game was close at the end. Clemson did what they needed to do to win, and Ohio State didn't. I have them at 3rd. I think 3, 2, and 1 are obvious. I don't see how anybody can argue any other team than these 3 for the top 3, and I don't see how you could argue any other order. OSU 3, Clemson 2, Ohio, Joe Brady, not Joe Brady, LSU 1. Clemson a clear 2. Huge news for them too. Travis Etienne coming back. I don't understand these run. Listen, if you're a Clemson fan, you got to be loving it. In 2016, when Sony Michel and Nick Chubb announced they were going to come back to Georgia for their senior year, I loved it. I still think it's a dumb decision for a running back to make. Travis Etienne would be taken in the first round of the NFL draft. You'll never convince me that he wouldn't. He's one of the best 2 or 3 running backs in all of college football. He might be the best. Getting him back is huge for Clemson. I still think it's a dumb decision for Travis Etienne. Running backs have limited miles on their tires. There are so many carries a running back has in his lifetime, period. And the more you use up in Pee-wee, high school, and college, the less you have to get paid for in the NFL. If I was a running back with a top 3 grade, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd round, I'm coming out after my junior year. Again, Clemson, I'm sure, is loving it. This is a huge deal. Clemson will be the favorite, in my opinion, heading into the 2020 season to win the national title. They'll have the easiest path again. That's not their fault. Don't start with the who have they played thing. And they got a loaded team. They'll be the favorite. But I've got Clemson coming in number 2. And, of course, LSU at number 1. The only question about LSU, clearly one of the greatest seasons we've seen in college football in a long, long time. A lot of debate about, is LSU the best team ever? Did they have the best season ever? I think it's absolutely ridiculous to try to classify something you just watched a week ago as the best in history of all time. We're too quick to do that as a society in general about all different kinds of things. Let's wait a year or two before we judge this 2019 LSU team. They're clearly one of the best 10 teams we've seen in the BCS era, going back to however far you want to go back, 92, 98, however, the last 30 years, whatever you want to go back. They're clearly one of the best 10 that we've seen. 95, Nebraska, 2001, Miami. I think the 2004 Southern Cal team with Leinart and Bush and all those guys, amazing team. I think LSU, I think 2018 Clemson is probably pretty good and will go down when it's all said and done as one of the best teams of this era. And LSU is probably in that conversation. But let's wait a year or two. Let's not crown a team we just watched play a week ago as the greatest ever. We're too quick to do that. Amazing season. Questions for LSU. You're losing Joe Burrow. You're losing Joe Brady. You're losing a ton of juniors and seniors to the NFL. Now, LSU loses a ton of juniors and seniors in the NFL every single year. This isn't anything new. Look at LSU's recruiting rankings. Look at how many players they put in the NFL every single year. They're top 5 in terms of all the teams in college football as far as number of players in the NFL. So that's not new. What is new was Joe Brady. He was only there 1 year. I don't know that that's long enough for us to look at LSU and think they're going to be like a new Oklahoma. And what I mean by that is a plug-and-play thing at quarterback. The system is in place. All you got to do is plop a guy up and set him in there, and he's going to have ridiculous numbers. I'm not sure that's the case at LSU yet. I'm going to have to see it for a second year in a row without Burrow and without Brady. On top of that, they lose their defensive coordinator, Dave Aranda. He takes the head coaching job at Baylor. So a lot of turnover, both with players and coaches going on there at LSU. So we're going to find out a lot more about Ed Orgeron next year, right? He's got some replacement to do in terms of players and coaches. Is Ed Orgeron the coach that we've seen for the 10 years that he's been coaching between Ole Miss and LSU and Southern Cal? Or is he the coach we saw last year? Or is it a combination or somewhere in the middle? We're going to find that out about LSU next year. I don't think LSU will be the favorite to win the national title heading into 2020. I don't even think LSU will be the favorite to win the West or the SEC heading into 2020. That doesn't mean they can't win it or they won't win it. They weren't the favorite to do any of those things this year, and they had no problem going 15-0 and absolutely destroying almost every single team they played. So that shouldn't bother you if you're an LSU fan that you might not be the favorite heading into 2020 because you weren't the favorite heading into 2019. And how'd that work out for you? But I've got them finishing up this year in the number 1 spot in the final UNCLELOU top 10 poll. So there you go. There's my top 10 with a little bit of explanation about why I ranked the teams the way I did. I have a good time doing these top 10 polls all throughout the season. They're one of the most debated videos you can probably make. Anytime you make a top 10 list of anything, there's going to be a whole lot of people that disagree with some of what you say, and there's going to be some people that disagree with all of what you say. Feel free to let me know in the comments down below what you think I got wrong. Like I said, the 2 I had the hardest time on was 8 and 9. Bama and Penn State. Could you flip-flop those? Yes. And 4 and 5, Georgia and Oregon. Could you flip-flop those? Yes, I think you could. Anyway, that's it. That's my last top 10 poll for the 2019 season. Just to remind you again, I'll have my first way too early 2020 preseason poll out after signing day in February. I'll then have a second updated preseason poll that comes out after the spring games in April and May. And then I'll have a third preseason poll that comes out around the end of summer, usually between the middle to the end of July. Stick around during the off season. We have a lot of fun here. I appreciate you guys watching. Subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up, and I'll see you again real soon. Have a good morning and that.